Okay, can you hear us now, Mr. Chair?
Yes, thanks, Stephen.
Okay.
Are we live yet?
We are live, yes.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Robert Hutchings. I'll be chairing the hearing today. I'm joined on the panel with Ron Merritt and Cynthia Stevens. Representing the Assessment and Taxation Department, City of Winnipeg, is Merrick Frolick, and our secretary today is Stephen Lunn. Stephen, I believe there's no other Zoom participants. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment role in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that we mail to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. Today, we will be hearing items 1 and then 4 through 8 on our docket today. Mr. Lund, can you please affirm the assessor and applicant's testimony?
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Merrick Frolick.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And Mr. Reimer, please state your full name. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Good afternoon, Mr. Reimer, Mr. Frolick. First item on the docket today is item number 1, file number 22-2125. Address is 65 Paramount Road, and we're dealing with a 2023 realty assessment appeal. Just to confirm, there's no preliminary issues from either party on this property?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Frolick, bear with us a second and we'll get your brief up here. Okay, Mr. Frolick, 65 Paramount Road, when you're ready, please.
Sure thing. Assessed value for 2023 is $24,506,000. Okay, just making sure that the phone's off. Awesome. What we have is a industrial strip mall that's in the Inkster Industrial Park. It's north of Inkster and to the east of Q8 Boulevard on 65 Paramount. Buildings have been built between 1974 and 2004. Wall height's 22 feet. We have a land area of 719,471. We have a leasable area of 328,143. And we're asking that the assessed value be confirmed today. Property owner has been compliant with regards to completing income and expense mailers. What we have on page 2 is just an overall series of rents that we have for the subject property. the leases range from like 2014, which is the oldest at 675. There was actually a really low one at 430 and at 437. But they range throughout the building. The average model rent is $6.16, and you can see by looking at the subject property leases that we have on file, we're within that range. In 2018, the subject property went through a fire, and so they were leasing some new developmental spaces with regards to it. And this is just an example of some of the redeveloped space that was under lease. Just an overview with regards to, I guess, where the fire had taken place and what's available to be leased. On page 4, we show some pictures of the subject property. And on page 5 is just in the general overview of where the subject property is relative to other important locations in the northwest part of the city of Winnipeg. Page 6 shows some more pictures. And page 7 just shows a general overview, showing that, property consists of 4 industrial buildings with a combined area of 327,185. Just a highlight of the utilities, rail, and different services that it has. Immediate access to 2 main traffic points being Inkster and Route 90. And page 8 shows some more pictures. I'm now on page 9. Is everyone with me? Okay.
Yes.
On page 9, so what we got an overview of all the different PIDs and all the different locations. So it's just showing the variety of rents that we have here. And I've also stated that the average rent that we have is $6.16. We have a 7% vacancy for the subject property, and 3% for expenses, $385 for shortfall, coming up with a net operating income of $1,735,620 or $1,736,620 using a 7.1% cap rate. We come with $24,445,000. What's interesting about this here right now is when I was bringing out the mailer in 2020, they're showing a net operating income of $1,939,000. And if you look at the front page of our brief here, they're showing a net operating income of $1,735,620. So I look at it, that's a good indication that I feel that our model value is quite reasonable based on what they've provided to us on the income expense mailer. On page 10, there's an example of some rents that we have here, ranging from $595 to $650, all in the Inkster in the northwest quadrant of the city of Winnipeg. Capitalization rates are listed here. Property owner has been compliant with regards to the mailer. And one interesting point here that I want to share, and Carrie will probably expand upon this up a bit later, but on page 14, they're showing the areas that were affected by the fire. And those areas haven't been a part of the vacancy rate as it states right now. I'm not too sure when they were available for leasing, but because the lease that I have here is current, so I do not know how long these properties, how aggressively they've been, or when the renovations were completed for the subject property. And page 16 shows some more information with regards to revenues and from the mailers. And before I open myself up to questions here, I just want to say that Mr. Reimer and I spent a lot of time working on this docket. And even though we were only able to resolve 2 issues, there's a lot of good communication, a lot of forthright conversation, and we tried our best to make this hearing as quick as possible. So I want to thank Kerry for the effort that he took in taking the time with me to answer my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frolick. Mr. Reimer, any questions on the evidence presented by the assessor?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate your comments, Mr. Frolick. Always good to have a direct line of sight and communication, whether we can resolve it or not. So I echo those comments. Could I please ask the board members and Mr. Frolick to turn to page 9 of the department's brief, please? So, Mr. Frolick, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a model-driven valuation right from the potential rent right through the cap rate, correct?
Yeah, because what we do is we collect all the income and expense mailers that are in the northeast quadrant, and then we do the necessary adjustments to make sure that they're net rents, and then subsequently we come up with a model generated rent
Okay, so it is modeled right from top to bottom, correct?
based on the 2020 income and expense mailers.
Okay, now, and you're right, I'm gonna have some brief comments about that fire that was in there. Did you have a chance though? So you've got the situation with the property leading up to the fire, which I believe was in October of 18. And then after the units came back online in April of 20, but with respect to prior to the fire, were you able to review the mailers for this property prior to that, specifically with respect to vacancy?
Yeah, you know what, Kerry, I did not, just because of time constraints,
I understand. No,
I'm just trying to create a brief as quickly as possible and try to negotiate a potential deal if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I understand timelines right now. Okay. Mr. Chairman, those are my questions on this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Cynthia, any questions of the assessor?
No, thank you. I'm good.
Thank you. Ron, any questions of the assessor?
Just one, Mr. Frolick. Your position, you've stated, when you did your income, at 24,445,000, yet the assessment is 24,506. So what is it?
You know what happens sometimes? I would, for
the sake of rounding?
No, you know what it boils down to is sometimes when we create the briefs, there are changes that are done to the PIDs where there's a recalculation. So the 24,506 is what was sent out on June, like the first week of June. And then subsequently, when I printed off my brief, there were probably some changes to the property, which has derived the lower value. So I will honor the value of 24,445.
Okay.
Even though we sent out 24,506, it's not that much of a discrepancy. Say if the discrepancy was $3 million, I would go on with what we sent out. But whenever that error occurs, Mr. Merritt, it's because of the fact that adjustments have been made to the roll, and we'll print off the current one. We won't print it off the certified one.
The gist of anything here for this particular property is rents.
Yes.
Because you're both at the same cap rate.
And I think vacancy is an issue as well.
Okay. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ron. And I have no questions of the assessor. Mr. Reimer, bear with us 1 second. I want to, until we get to your brief, please.
Certainly.
Does everybody have it? All right, Mr. Reimer, when you are ready, please, 65 Paramount Road.
Pardon me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask the panel members, Mr. Frolick, to please turn to page 14 of our evidence in chief? So I'll frame the discussion actually for this property as well as the remaining properties on the docket, Mr. Chairman, with your permission. What I would propose to do is to go through the non-recoverable expense study at a very high level, but only go through it once, as well as the capitalization rate study so that we don't have to sort of rehash those common documents for the rest of the docket after this initial hearing. Does that meet with your approval?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So on page 14, Mr. Chairman, actually, Mr. Frolick had characterized the issues in this case exactly correctly. There's actually three. One of them relates to potential net market income to be applied. One of them relates to the vacancy allowance to be applied in this particular case. And the third issue relates to the non-recoverable expense allowance. The department having applied a total of 3 and Altus having applied a total of 7. So initially then, when we look at page 14, and Mr. Chairman, I apologize in advance. I am coughing a wee bit. I will keep it to a minimum. I apologize to the extent that interrupts the flow a little bit. The potential net market income we have on, as shown on page 14, is $1,854,341. It is to a very, very large extent. In fact, it's well within the evaluation and the market data presented by Mr. Froelich. And actually, the range is identical. We've got a low rent. That's the second last row with RS distribution. That's the low lease that Mr. Froelich referred to at 437. Now that stands to reason. It's actually a November 1st, 2018 lease, so it is very close to the reference date. And the reason for that being so low is that they obviously occupy a very, very significant portion of space at 61,759 feet. So that's at the low end, and at the upper end, as you can see, there's actually a couple of leases at $7, one at $7.01 and one at $7, and the remainder are sort of in between. So we've applied. Certainly, we're convinced that the leases in place for the occupied spaces represent market based on all of the information that we reviewed, and it results, along with the application, of a market rent of $575 a square foot for the two larger units of over 10,000 feet, and a market rent of $6 a square foot for the two smaller units of between 5,000 and 8,000 square feet. That then results in a total potential net market rent of $1,854,341, and we're suggesting that rent this afternoon. The vacancy allowance, the vacancy allowance in this case, Mr. Froelich's bang on with his comments concerning the fire. So what happened was there was a fire that impacted a couple of the units at this site. The fire occurred in October of 18. The damage was repaired through October 18 until April 1st, 2020, and the spaces that had been fire damaged were rebuilt and rehabilitated and were available for lease as of April 1 of 20. So between April 1 of 20 and the reference date, basically 1 year, the units were available for lease, unfortunately, without any takers during that time. Now turning to page 15, and the reason for my suggestion, I don't fault Mr. Froelich. The timelines right now, I understand his timelines are problematic, but the reason for my question was, in this property, there have been significant and elevated and chronic vacancies impacting the property prior to the fire and again after the fire. As we can see in the chart on page 15, the vacancy rate in 16 and 17 was 21 and 18% respectively, so an average of, call it 20%. Then in April of 18, the vacancy remained at 18%. Subsequent to that, there was the fire. And in 2019, 18 and 19, the vacancy rate there was primarily a function of the units being offline. But then again in 2020, as I've mentioned, as April 1st, 2020, the units came back online with no success in leasing them, and the vacancy rate remained at 12%. So looking at it, it's a bit peculiar because of that intervening event with the fire, but given the historical problems pre-fire and the elevated vacancy rate, and then again, the vacancy rate between April 1 of 20 and the reference date being at 12%, we're suggesting, considering all of that, that the vacancy allowance in this case should be at 9%. And that's the rate we've applied in our valuation. Shortfall rate, we're applying the $385 a square foot. Non-recoverable expenses, I'll speak to that in a minute. We are suggesting the total non-recoverable expense allowance of 7%, which relates to what we're calling non-recoverable at 5%, and then what's formerly known as the quote-unquote other expense to do a structural reserve at 2%. And, pardon me, the capitalization rate in this case actually is not an issue. We're applying the 7.1%, which is consistent with the industrial capitalization rate data that we've also presented in support of our request. So then moving through to page 17, with the application of the potential net market rent of $1,854,341, the vacancy allowance at 9%, the non-recoverables at a full 5%, and the cap rate at 7.1. Our suggestion this afternoon is to reduce the value to $20,502,000 rounded. If I could then ask the board members and Mr. Froelich to please turn briefly to our non-recoverable expense study. Mr. Chairman, let me know when you're ready.
Harry, how many pages is your document these days? Is it 88?
The non-recoverable expense study is, yes, that would be the 88 pages.
Okay, no problem, because I noticed there were some differences to the cap rate studies, and so that's why I'm asking about the non-recoverables.
Okay.
Okay, I'm on item number 17, Altus Group 2023 capitalization rate study. Would that be it, Mr. Reimer?
I was going to go through non-recoverables first, but I'm happy to go through.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, no, we'll go back one here. There we are. Item 16 on our agenda. Would everybody have it? Cynthia, are you okay, Ron?
Yes, I've got it. Thank you.
And Mr. Frolick, you got it?
I got an old one, so I think I'm good to go.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Reimer.
It hasn't changed, Mr. Frolick, so you should be good to go. Okay, so pardon me, starting at page 2, and as I mentioned, I'm going to go through this at a very high level. Everyone this afternoon has heard this, I know, many times. At the bottom of page 2, what we're suggesting that this allowance that we're requesting at 5% was never intended to be relating to management fees, which are admittedly absolutely covered, typically recovered by tenants on net leases, but rather relating to expenses that are not recoverable by the tenants even under net leases. And in the statement down at the bottom of page 2, that's reinforced from the department's manuals, which said even with net leases and competent management, there will still be expenses incurred by the landlords that are non-recoverable from the tenants. In our study, those non-recoverable expenses relate to leasing commissions, advertising, marketing, and in some very limited instances, asset management fees and professional fees. The concept of the deduction of the non-recoverable expenses is also reinforced through appraisal theory. If you move to page 4, at the towards the bottom of page 4, from our appraisal text, case studies and appraisal, it states the appraiser should also account for non-recoverable expenses. The most important non-recoverable cost items to be aware of are space marketing costs, which include both tenant inducements and leasing costs. And it's that concept that we're suggesting needs to be applied with respect to the non-recoverable expense allowance. Then turning briefly to take a very quick look at what a couple of other provinces are doing. The Saskatchewan Municipal Appraisal Guide also makes reference to these non-recoverable expenses. And if I turn now to page 7, they list the typical non-recoverable operating expenses that are not included in recoveries, and they include legal and audit fees, structural repairs. Now note, the structural repair component is in our respectful submission covered by the 2% allowance, so that's not included in our study for that purpose. Advertising and promotion and leasing commissions, and those 3 items, not the structural, but the other 3 are included in our analysis. Similarly, MPAC, which is the Provincial Assessment Authority in Ontario, makes a comment on, and this is now on page 8 towards the top. And MPAC states there's typically 2 areas where the property owner has to cover expenses: non-recoverable operating expenses, which are not passed on to the tenants, such as legal and audit fees, advertising and promotional fees, and in our respectful submission, leasing commissions. So then, as to the confirmation of the expense items that we included in our analysis, if we turn then briefly to page 10, as I mentioned, there's 4 items that comprise our non-recoverable study, and they're leasing commissions, professional fees, in some limited cases, asset management fees. Those are the exception to the rule. Most of them don't have those fees, and advertising, marketing. So then on page 11, we have our table showing the non-recoverable expense analysis over typically, and actually it says 3-year at the top. Typically now it's been a 5-year analysis for most properties. And as you can see, it comes in at an average of 6.64% and a median of 5.98%. Now for the board's information, and I stress this, we're not relying on it, but for the board's information, if one includes tenant improvements in the analysis, as you can see on the very right-hand column, the expense average and median expenses increases a lot to 10.66 and 8.6 respectively. That we provide for information only. That does not, our request ultimately is based upon the non-recoverable expenses exclusive of the TIs. Then turning to page 12, something that we've as you might recall, Mr. Chairman, from our previous submissions as well as our submissions last cycle, the Altus Group capitalization rate study invariably includes the full 5% allowance. And I did want to draw the attention to the board of the impact on the indicated capitalization rate if the 5% allowance is either eliminated or reduced to 1%, which has been the department's methodology this cycle. On page 13, starting on page 13, we've got a scenario, and I've presented the same scenario, the very same assumptions, save and except for a different assumption for the non-recoverable expense rates. And as you'll see, it does have a very, very significant impact on the indicated cap rate. On page 13, the first set of assumptions, and I'll just briefly list the assumptions that are identical. It assumes a potential net rent of $1 million, a vacancy allowance of 5%, an expense allowance, other expense allowance of 2%, shortfall rate of 7%, and a purchase price of $11.5 million. Those assumptions and parameters do not change in any of these scenarios. So on page 13, using all those assumptions and the 5%, full 5% for non-recoverable allowance, the indicated cap rate, as you can see at the bottom of page 13, is 7.38%. Then though, crucially, if you turn to page 14, this presentation on page 14 is, as I say, are the very, very same valuation assumptions, save and except for a reduction in the non-recoverable expense allowance to 0. And the cap rate indicated when that reduction is to 0% is applied, the indicated cap rate is 7.79%. So basically fully 40 basis points higher than if the 5% allowance is applied. Finally, on page 15, and this is probably the most germane to our discussion, this is the very same set of assumptions, save and except for a reduction in non-recoverable expense to 1%. And as you can see there, keeping everything else the same, the indicated capitalization rate is 7.71%. Again, 33% increase in the capitalization rate indicated in that transaction. The reason that I draw this to the board's attention, obviously this issue has been very, very contentious, but I stress that if the board were inclined to reduce the non-recoverable expense allowance from 5 to 1, and that's certainly the board's prerogative, but then that has a direct bearing. There's an inverse relationship between that reduction and the capitalization rate request because of our analysis, which includes the 5%. And we would, in that circumstance, if the board chooses to reduce the non-recoverable to 1%, we would ask that our capitalization rate request be increased by 25 basis points. So that's the non-recoverable expense study.
Mr. Reimer, you know what? We've got, all of us have the document in front of us. Perhaps we'll do allow questions by the assessor and the panel regarding your presentation so far on non-recoverables. Mr. Frolick? Any questions, Mr. Frolick?
Yeah, well, I'm just looking at the summary pages on Mr. Reimer's brief. Where are the non-recoverable expenses on the schedule of revenues and property costs for this property? Because I don't see it on the document.
Okay. Are you going back to the initial income?
Well, no, because but it sort of coincides with it, right? Because, because if we look at the first page of Mr. Reimer's brief, or on page 2, just bear with me here for a sec here. It talks about net operating incomes, equal potential annual net rent, minus vacancy plus other. Then it says income minus non-recoverable expenses. So I'm just wondering where it would be on in Mr. Reimer's brief for non-recoverable operating expenses, the actuals.
Sorry, you're talking me. Are you talking on my valuation, Mr. Frolick, or?
Well, yeah, because I am looking at your brief. I'm looking at page, I'm looking at, just give me 1 second. I was looking at page 25 and 26.
Now, we're not referring to the non.
Okay, you know what? Okay, so you know what? In fairness, gentlemen, I'll go back to that.
Okay,
And then, you know, and so because I've heard this before, what's in terms we've talked about leasing commissions and tenant improvements, what's the municipal board's position on that in terms of valuation at hearings at that level?
Yeah, your question's a good one, Mr. Frolick, and I am glad to be able to answer this. What the municipal board has said clearly and repeatedly is you shall not deduct tenant improvements and leasing commissions from top line from the potential net market income to be applied. Because if you do that, effectively what you're doing is calculating a net effective rent, which is not part of anyone's analysis here, and you've got to adjust your cap rate. So Mr. Frolick, your question is a very good one, but that's my very point. We are not calculating an NER, not in any way, shape, or form. We're using the face rents. What we're saying, and this is the question I suggest that has not been argued at the municipal board, what I'm suggesting is that the 5% non-recoverable allowance, not off the top line, but as an appropriate non-recoverable expense allowance, that issue has not been debated at the municipal board, and we fully intend to bring it forward. I fully understand, and again, I go back to it, that the municipal board has said you shall not deduct it from the potential rents to come in at an NER, and we're not doing that.
No other questions because I want to expedite this process. Thank you.
yeah, no, we will deal with your question when we go through the income and
Okay.
calculation. How would that be, Mr. Frolick? Okay, thank you. Cynthia, any questions from Mr. Reimer regarding the non-recoverable presentation?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Ron?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and I'm good. I have no questions either. So, Mr. Reimer, then we're going to go to the next document would be the cap rate study. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I think we've all got it. So when you're ready, please.
So again, I'm going to go through this. I know this has been presented many, many times, and actually capitalization rate in this case is not under debate, but I propose to just present the study for the information of the board for the remainder of the docket. So to cut to the heart of it, I'm actually going to go straight to, if I could ask the board members and Mr. Frolick to turn to page 16 of that document, please. So on page 16, the capitalization rates that capitalization rate indicators that we had looked at are located sort of at the middle of that page in that chart, and the conclusions that we came to based on that data was that the top quality industrial product would have.
Sorry, Carrie, can I for some reason all of a sudden, I don't know if anybody else is, I'm having trouble hearing.
I had similar issues.
I don't know, did your microphone get covered maybe, or?
I don't know.
Hear me okay?
Is it better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Apologies. I'll go like this. So at page, sorry, to go back then briefly, page 16. If everyone's there.
Yes.
Yeah.
At page 16, there's the chart from the previous cycle with the cap rate indicators that we examined, and the conclusions that we came to is that the best quality industrial, grade A industrial space would have rates of between 6.25 and 7. The B category would be between 7 and 7.75, and the lower quality stock would be at 8% plus. Then turning to page 17, we've got some capitalization rate indicators that range. Actually, that range, and I'm going to make a correction. The Sherwin Road, I noticed, should have if you could please make a note, Mr. Chairman, should have a rate of 6.81%. In lieu of the 7.42, so if you make that note. So the capitalization rates there range from 6.5% to a little over 9% for the properties listed there. And the cap rate conclusions based on all of the data that we looked at were again for the Class A, top quality, some compression at between 6 and 6.5. Class B between 6.5 and 7.5, and again, the lower quality at 8% plus. So based upon that information, and the capitalization rate indicators that we had in this particular case, we're applying the 7.1%, certainly being well within that range. And based on that, we're requesting the reduction for the subject to a value of $20,502,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Frolick, any questions on the cap rate study?
I think our cap rates are the same, are they not?
They are in this case.
Okay, so I have no questions. Sorry.
Thank you. Ron, any questions on the cap rate study?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Cynthia?
I have none either, thank you.
Thank you. And I have none either. So now, Mr. Reimer, we are going to find your brief. Let's see, where are we? And we're going to go back. All right. So your initial brief, item number 5, I think, on our agenda. And Mr. Frolick, do you have any questions on the brief presented by the applicant?
Oh, actually, I do have a clarification though, with regards to Mr. Reimer, because what I had done here with regards to the redevelopment, Carrie, so approximately the square footage was 40,000 square feet were lost of the subject property due to the fire?
Let me, I'll just take a quick peek and. Yeah, I have about 39,500 feet. So yes, very close to 40,000 feet. Exactly.
Okay. And so, and I'm going to reference, so there's 2 points of contention here, and a lot of this is time constraints. On page 3 of my brief, they have a listing for 19,000 square feet. So can we assume, Carrie, that they've been able to lease up half of this 10 to 40,000 square feet of space?
I can't tell you what's happened post-reference, Mr. Frolick. I can tell you as of the reference date, the vacancy rate was 12%.
Okay. And so, okay. So the reason why I asked that question is because when I look at the rents that you're using here today, and I've pulled February 2nd, Lisa from Collier's stating that they're looking for $6.50 as a leasable rent, which is significantly higher than the $4.37 and the $4.30 that we have in the system here. And the reason why I asked that is that.
Mr. Frolick, where's that evidence that you just mentioned?
Well, I'm looking at page 4. Okay. So for starters here, what I've done here is I'm under oath. And so what I've done, and this is a mistake on my behalf, in my brief, I have blocked out on page 3, the leasable, the amount of $6 of what it was post-reference. But I have in front of me here right now that I could send for your review is that when the space was redeveloped after the fire, the redeveloped leasable space was, the lease rent was $6.50, which is significant. And you're not always going to get $6.50, but I'm just wondering because, you know, you're using $5.75. Meanwhile, we have a couple rents here that are significantly lower than that. So I'm just wondering, you know, why you haven't used rents that are more closer to the actual rents that are being advertised for vacant space.
Well, that's easy, Mr. Frolick. They've been sitting vacant for 12 months, and I don't think an asking rent realistically, obviously, was getting anywhere with the market.
Well,
and then going further, you know, the 10,481, the 10 and 15,000 foot units, we used 5 3/4. That would have been, if you look at unit 109, for instance, that was an October 18 lease for 19,000 feet, admittedly a bit bigger at 575. And so I mean, Could it be a touch higher? Yeah. Could it also be a touch lower? Absolutely.
Okay.
In terms of the demand on that.
So coming back to page 3 of my brief, if you go 19,000 square feet divided by the leasable area of 328,000 square feet, what is that percentage?
19,000 feet?
19,000 divided by 328,000 square feet.
I don't know, Mr. Frolick, but
Okay, it works out to like 6.1%.
okay, but the actual vacancy was 12, you understand?
But what we're showing here is we're showing what's actually being leased moving forward here, right? So what we have here right now is we're showing the fact that the vacancy has improved since then.
No, Mr. Frolick, can I get you please to turn to page 23 of our materials? Tell me when you're there.
23
Page 23, please.
of the brief.
Yeah, of my evidence and sheet. Yes, exactly.
I have it on page 15 or page 23. Oh yeah, the page 23 is the
rental. Should be the rental. I hope.
Yeah, I got rental information on page 23, yes.
Okay, so what was vacant, if you look there, is unit 69, 71, 71A, and 73.
Yep.
So that's 40,000 feet, as I mentioned, had been vacant from April 1 of 20 when it came back online through the reference date. So that's a comprehensive listing of the vacant area.
Okay. And so, but the point is, let me finish here. Mr. Reimer, wouldn't brand new redeveloped space command a higher market rent than the rent that you're using of $5.65 when it does become leasable?
If the market will bear it, absolutely. There was no indication the market was bearing it. They were vacant.
So why are they asking for a rent that's a lot higher than the $5.65 that you presented here for actuals?
Mr. Frolick, you can appreciate that if brokers are going to, the brokers will try to maximize the rate of return for the owner, and they're going to advertise a rate that they may or may not expect to achieve. And what's very clear is that the market was not responding favorably to the listing. It remained vacant. It's a fine point whether you use 575 or 6, but at the rate that was asking, there was no taker. There were no takers.
Well, we're using 616 and they're asking for 650. So that's why, and the reason why this is an issue, if this building was 10,000 square feet, it would not be an issue here. But when you're dealing with a building here that's 328,000 square feet, having a difference in market rent of almost 50 cents is pretty significant. Would you not agree with that?
Absolutely, I agree with that. And I believe that our application of the market rent fairly reflects the lack of demand that was, the silence here was definitely, Mr. Crow. There was no takers on those 4 units.
You know what? No other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frolick. Ron, any questions of the applicant?
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia, any questions?
Just to clarify, those 4 units were vacant after the fire and after they'd been rehabilitated. Had they been leased previous to the fire, Carrie, or were they? Yes. They were. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely. Very good question. They were, in fact, it didn't form part of the vacancy prior. So just to clarify for the board, Mr. Chairman, the vacancy rates, as I set out pre-fire, are in that chart that I've got in our materials at page 15. Fire happens in October of 18, and those units go offline until April of 2020, and then they come back online. And that's, Ms. Stevens, to your question, they had been occupied pre-fire. Fire happened, they rehabilitated them, came back online in April 1 of 2020 and remained vacant until through the reference date.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, I'm looking on page 14, pardon me. your income approached the
Yep.
potential market rent. So
Yep.
these are actual rents in the subject property.
They are indeed, yeah.
Okay, and when would this be a snapshot of?
This is a snapshot as of the reference date.
Okay. All right. So my question is, I think one of you presented evidence of a 2020 NOI of $1,939,000 or $37,000 that was submitted by the property owner.
Yes, indeed. So if you turn, I think that was Mr. Froelich. So if you turn to our page 25,
Yeah, okay, that's what I couldn't find it on here. Yes.
and this is now our evidence in chief, Mr. Froelich's bang on. There's no doubt that sorry?
Yeah, now I see it. Yes. So you got a summary there on page 25. Okay.
Actually, if you turn to page 26, it gives you a bit more detail.
Okay.
Now, there's a couple of, pardon me, the recoveries in this case, the property operating cost recoveries as shown there for 2020 were $1,115,000, which actually exceeded the operating costs, and there will have been a reconciliation to the tenants, which would have brought that income down. So no doubt that the 2020 taken in isolation, the net operating income in place based on all revenue sources after adjusting for that over recovery would have been about $1 million. Having said that, if one looks at the prior year, of course, 2019, the NOI was closer to 1.6, and then when you go for prior years, and I'll just give the board the page reference numbers. On our page 35, actually, I'll just make this. If I could ask the board members and Mr. Froelich to turn to page 35. And as you can see on page 35, these are the 17 and 18 operating results. And they, in both years, they would have been in the 1.3 to 1.4 million range. So yes, the 2020, pardon me, NOI taken in isolation was higher than what we're calculating. But in my respectful submission, that doesn't take into account the historical vacancy issues and the vacancy that was known going into 2021. And that particularly high NOI for that 1 year wouldn't represent, I suggest, a longer term stabilized amount, given the results, although we're going back to 17 right through to 2020. But there's no doubt factually that what Mr. Froelich has presented is accurate as far as what's reported.
Okay. My next question is, following up on Cynthia's, when the fire occurred, those units, I believe, were being leased.
Yes.
What happens to those leases when there's fire damage like that?
So the tenant, I don't know all the details, Mr. Chairman. I'm told that they temporarily moved into some other space, but as a result of the timeline for repairs, those tenants were not interested in moving back into the units. Roughly, that would have been roughly 16 months later.
So they moved to another space within the subject property?
Actually, I think they, let me take a look. That's a very good question. No, it doesn't appear as though they did.
Okay. And my next question, I'm not sure if you can answer this, but you're asking for a 9% vacancy, I believe. And it's not only because of the fire, but because of historical vacancy, in your opinion. When a fire occurs, does insurance replace that income that's lost during the fire damage?
I have no comment, Mr. Chairman, on the rental insurance. That would be outside of the scope of this valuation.
Yeah,
I don't know. Know.
Okay. Okay, I believe that is all my questions. Any requirement for summary, Mr. Frolick?
If I won't have one if Terry doesn't have one.
Carrie?
I'm okay, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, good. That concludes 65 Paramount Road. Next property on the docket is item number, 4, file number 22-2575, 1881 Burroughs Avenue. We're dealing with a 2023 Realty Assessment Appeal, and I believe we've got a preliminary issue for a request for non-cooperation. Is that right, Mr. Frolick?
That is correct.
Okay. Let's see here. Sorry, all right, Mr. Frolick, shall we deal with that preliminary issue first, please?
Yep, for sure. So if you reference to, well, before we start any further, so this property was on appeal for the first time in 2020.
Mr. Frolick, would you mind reading the roll number and everything?
Yeah, I apologize. Okay. I have file numbers 22-2575. Roll number is 14-0646-01100.
Thank you.
Address is 1881 Burroughs Avenue. So this is a brand new property that was built in 2018. When the property was appealed in 2020, because it was we worked 2020 off of the 2017 mailer. No mailer existed because the business didn't exist at the time, so we didn't ask for non-compliance. Subsequently, we're asking for non-compliance because business has been operational now for 4+ years. So subsequently, we're wanting to be able to create a good model, so we need to have good information. So which is why we're asking for non-compliance. So on page 14 of my brief, you'll see the initial letter that went out with regards to the company on April 15th that we sent out, just asking for the income expense information for this property. On page 15, we have some highlights for this with regards to what the due date was for the mailer. And then subsequently, here's a registered letter that went out on June 9th, 2021, asking for information with regards to the income expense mailer. And here is on page 17, here's the Canada Post information with regards to please find below the scan delivery and signature. Unfortunately, there's no signature on here, but they did confirm that they did mail this property out to the property owner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frolick. Mr. Reimer, any comments or questions?
I have no response at this stage. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ron, any questions of the assessor?
I don't think so. Thank you. No.
Cynthia, any questions?
Well, I'm just trying to ascertain. So Canada Post has indicated that it was like normally they wait for a signature. So do you know what happened here? Because there's nothing there.
Well, they tried delivering it. They delivered it to the set address. They've confirmed that they've delivered it. Because of COVID and so many businesses being shut down, the procedure is as following, is that they've confirmed that they have delivered it, but they did not get a signature.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Cynthia. Mirik, I'm looking on page 17. The signatory name FD agent, does that stand for front desk agent?
I guess so, yes.
Okay. Thank you. I have no questions. So we are going to recess, Mr. Stephen, and discuss the evidence presented by both parties regarding the request for non-cooperation.
If I'm a touch late, I'm getting a cough candy as well because I'm losing my throat as well. Okay.
Okay, Mr. Chair, we're back online.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll now call the hearing back to order. The panel has considered the evidence presented by both parties for a request for non-cooperation, and it is our opinion that the request be granted and that the onus be put on the applicant. So, Mr. Reimer, you are going to go first for 1881 Burroughs Avenue, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So this is 1881 Burroughs Avenue. The roll number is 14-064-601-100. File number 22-2575. And in light of the decision of the board and the circumstances relating to the non-compliance, we're asking for a confirmation under 54-1 at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Frolick, any questions, comments?
I wanted to talk about this property. I worked so hard on it. I'm very disappointed, Mr. Reimer. Very disappointed.
Okay. Well,
Save it for the municipal board, eh, guys?
save it for next time. Cynthia, any questions of
No questions. I apologize.
Okay. Cynthia?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Ron?
I think Mr. Frolick should keep his notes.
Oh, I will.
Oh, I have done this before.
I've spent a lot of time on that dock on this property,
yes.
so
Thank
I'm well
you.
versed.
Okay, so Mr. Reimer, you're asking for a confirmation of value at, I believe it's 7,047,000.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. That concludes 1881 Burroughs Avenue. Item number 4. Next property on the docket is item number 5, file number 22-1298. Address is 1633 Burroughs Avenue.
Mr. Chairman, is it 1633 or 1663?
Pardon me, 16, sorry, my eyes are watering here. 1663 Burroughs Avenue.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we're dealing with a 2023 the assessment appeal, and I believe there's no preliminary issue on this one. Is that correct?
I had no preliminary issues.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Frolick, bear with us 1 second. Find the brief here. Okay, Mr. Frolick, when you are ready, please. 1663 Burroughs Avenue.
What we have here is roll number 14-021-552100. It's one building built in 1990. Wall height is 26 feet. We have a land area of 67,483, and we got a leasable area of 27,272. Property owner has been compliant with regards to completing the income expense mailers. I've never inspected this property, but here's some outdoor pictures of it. And on the top of page 3 is the location of where the subject property is, just off of Burroughs, on the south side of the Inkster Industrial Park. And you can see where the big picture is on the top of page 3 and on the bottom of page 3. And we got a couple more pictures on page 4 and 5. Looking at page 6 of my incomes on my spreadsheet, or on my income workup, what we have here is we have a total leasable area of 27,272. We have a different PID here for second floor space of 1512, but it's my understanding, looking at the floor plans, and maybe Mr. Reimer could confirm this, but we have in our system, we have that second floor space as office space. So with that being said, I think we have a lower rent there where it should not be a lower rent, which is why another reason why I think this assessed value should be confirmed. Our blended rate for the subject property is $6.67, using a 4% vacancy loss. 3% expenses, 385 for shortfall. We come up with a net operating income of 165, 212. Using a cap rate of 5.85%, we come up with a net operating income of 2,824,000. What I have here is I got a series of rents that are all in the northwest quadrant. They're ranging from $6.50 to $7.55, all of similar sizes. Sizes range from 20,000 square feet to just under 32,000 square, or just over 31,000 square feet. Wall heights are all similar. Some of the new ones are built in 2000. Older ones were built in 1966. But overall, I feel our rent of $667 is very fair. On the next page, we have our cap rate study. And we do show the fact that the property is owner occupied. And that concludes my formal presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frolick. Mr. Reimer, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Mr. Frolick, just pardon me, briefly at your page 6 then, specifically, and again, the same question, from these are all model-driven parameters up to and including the capitalization rate?
That's correct.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. That's my question.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Cynthia, any questions of the assessor?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron?
None, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
And I have no questions either.
I do have one other comment to list because, you know,
Okay.
we talked about mailers before, right? So on page 11 of my brief, on page 10 on my brief, or page 10, you know, they're reporting 192,500 for rental income, but it's owner occupied. So there's always a contradiction. But if we use that 192 divided by the 25,900, it comes out to 741 as a rent there. But I don't know if that's a book rent or just a table rent that they're using for accounting purposes.
Okay.
But it's just something I want to share with the panel members, and I apologize for not sharing that sooner. And if Kerry has any questions about that, I'm open to questions.
Mr. Reimer, any questions?
I'll have a comment, but no question.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me. And I have no questions for the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Pardon me, for the assessor. I'm sorry. Mr. Reimer, go ahead.
Okay, so quick comment concerning Mr. Frolick's the last comments, and he's bang on. It's actually a book rent. There's identical ownership, and it's a holdco-opco situation, and we paid no reference to that lease information being between companies with common ownership. So instead, we referenced the market indicators. So if I could ask the board members, Mr. Frolick, to turn to page 14. And I'm going to be very brief because actually there's a very, very high degree of congruence between the rent the department applied and the market rent that we're suggesting in our valuation. On page 14, we've got some of these indicators there ranging from $6 a foot up to $7.95 a foot. That is for the most part, very consistent also with the rent comparable supplied by the department. Our low end is a little bit lower, but the top end is also a wee bit higher at the $7.95 a foot. Based on the subject, the size of the subject at 27,272, and looking at the market indicators, we're suggesting a net market rent of $650 a foot. Quite bluntly, if this board were inclined to use Mr. Frolick's potential rent, there's only about $4,000 difference, so not much to choose from there. Based on that, and sorry, to take a half step back, Mr. Frolick's right. My understanding too, that mezzanine space is finished office space, and that was something we certainly considered. We applied the same rate and not a storage rate for that area. We're applying a market vacancy allowance of 4% and shortfall rate of 385. For the reasons we discussed, we're asking for the restoration of the non-recoverable expense allowance of 5%. Now, in this case, the department's model capitalization rate is 5.85%. We're suggesting, and this is a good quality building. We're not suggesting otherwise, but based on the market indicators in our cap study, we're suggesting a capitalization rate in this case of 6.5%, being consistent with a better quality building. So then turning to page 16, the income valuation, the total potential rent we've got is $177,268. So again, that's within $4,000 roughly of the department's model-driven rent. And then running it through the more significant items that are different in our valuation relate to the non-recoverable expense of 5% and the cap rate of 6.5%. So based on those parameters, we're requesting a reduction to $2,372,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Frolick, any questions of the applicant?
Just one question of the applicant. Would the non-recoverable expenses be lower when the property is owner occupied?
Well, the quick answer is maybe. If you've got non-recoverable expenses that the owner is putting into it, for replacement of various long-lived items and such, that certainly would factor into it. But what you're not going to have, of course, Mr. Frolick, because this is, I think, where you're going, there's no leasing commissions because it's not for lease. There's no space marketing costs. But don't forget, and this is fundamental to the analysis, what we're doing is a fee simple valuation using an income approach, which investors are typically using for these kind of properties. And so we don't go with value and use based on ownership, Mr. Frolick. I'd suggest the principles are the same, regardless of whether it's owner occupied or not, because the way we're valuing it is a fee simple valuation with an investor making assumptions about, rent, vacancy, and also the non-recoverables. But I understand the question.
So then what's the likelihood of this property, which is only 27,000 square feet, being multi-tenanted where those factors would take into that a place on a fee simple basis?
Well, but if you've got Mr. Frolick, a case where this owner sells it to an investor without provision for that owner to lease it back, now the broker has to, or either the owner or the owner's broker has to lease the entire building. So that in that particular year, the leasing costs would be massive. And then effectively, assuming, for instance, a 5-year term, you'd have far more than 5% non-recoverable based on the leasing commission payable to the broker in year 1. And you have 0 in years 2, 3, 4, and 5, which very much stands to reason and is consistent with our study where some years you've got very, very high costs, other years it's almost close to 0.
Okay, this is my last question on this. So if the leasing commission's worth 20% in year 1, so you're saying that then subsequently over 4 years, then it would be 5% to have that basis? Because to me, a leasing commission of 20% would seem pretty high.
No, sorry, Mr. Frolick, I either misstated it or didn't quite clarify. In that scenario, the commissions that would be payable in year 1 would probably be close to 20%. But then for the very same reason, once you've got the building filled, there's no commissions payable in year 2, 3, 4, and 5. So it'd actually be closer to 0. So the average over the 5 years would be close to 5%, but it would be really high 1 year and then very, very low the rest. So
on a 5-year lease, would the commission be as high as 20% of the GPI over the period of time?
Would the commission amount to 20%?
Yeah, for year 1 to cover over those costs.
It would not be anywhere near 20%. No.
Okay. No other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frolick. Ron, any questions of the applicant?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Cynthia?
Just Mr. Reimer, can you just speak to your cap rate again? You said something about you weren't suggesting it was a low grade building, etc. But so why did you place the 6.5 on it?
The 6.5. So if I could ask Mr. Chairman, the board members, and Mr. Frolick to turn to page 17 of our capitalization rate study now. Tell me when you're there.
Yep, I'm here.
So on page 17, the chart in the middle there, the indicated range is between 6.5% and 9.1%. This property, as mentioned, it's a good quality property, and so we're going at the lower end of that range, and therefore suggesting the 6.5% rate in this case being at the lower end of those indicators.
So you're going at the lower end of Class B. Okay.
No, actually, you have to Yeah, sorry, yes, at the lower end.
or the upper end of Class A, but you're saying the lower end of Class B. Okay,
Exactly right, yeah.
okay. All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Mr. Reimer, I heard you say 6.25. Did I mishear that? And then you added 0.25 on the cap rate? Or did I mishear?
6.5 is the request, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, perfect, like the workup, okay. All right, that's my only question. Thank you. Any requirement for summary?
No, thank
I have
you.
nothing.
Mr. Reimer?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That includes 1663 Burroughs Avenue. Next item on the docket is item number 6, and we're dealing with 1345 Redwood Avenue, file number 22-1512, and we're dealing with a 2023 Realty Assessment Appeal. Mr. Frall, either party, any preliminary issues?
No.
I have nothing.
Okay. Mr. Reimer?
No.
All right. Just bear with me 1 second, please. Okay. Mr. Frolick, I have to find your brief here. There we are. Okay, Mr. Frolick, when you're ready, please. 1345 Redwood Avenue.
File numbers 22-1512, roll numbers 14-041, 569-000. For 2023, the value for this property is $9,437,000. One building originally built in 1953, but there's been significant renovations to the property. So we have an effective age of 1990 on the property. Wall height is 22 feet. Land area is 431,137, and the leasable area is 111,763. Property owner has been complying with regards to filling out the income and expense mailers. And subsequently, there was a sale on this property approximately 10 years ago for a value of $9,700,000. The subject property lease for the property that was originally in 2008, and there's been an add-on since then, is that the lease that we have from 2020 is $6.95. And actually, if we look at the 2021 release, income and expense mailer, the lease became in effect, the new lease on January 1st, 2021, which is within the frame period of the reference year. It's $7.20. Our model rent is $6.15, just for your information. I've never inspected this property, but there's some exterior pictures on page 2 and 3. And page 4 shows an overview of where the property is located at. It's on the corner of Redwood and Fife in the Inkster Industrial Park. On page 5 is a summary, just talking about that it's situated on a 9.9 acre site in Inkster Industrial Park. Property provides easy access to Winnipeg Industrial Airport and major routes such as Inkster Boulevard, Route 90, the Perimeter Highway. There's some product details. As I stated before, the model rent generated is $6.15, which is significantly lower than the $6.95 that the actual owner is getting. Using a 4% vacancy loss, 3% expenses, $385 for shortfall, come up with a net operating income of $622,841. Using a 6.6% cap rate, we come up with a value of $9,437,000, which ironically enough is a bit lower than the sale price of $9.7 million in 2012. What we have here for leases is we've got a series of leases here, comparable rents that range in size between 77,000 square feet to 161,000 square feet. The Burmac lease is a lease lease back, so I want to state that there. But all other leases have been investigated and they are reflective of market conditions. So even though the actual rent's at $6.95, we're using $6.15, but we're well within the range of using the rents that we have in place here. We talked about the cap rate study, and that concludes my final presentation. Thank you. Well, actually, you know what? Before we go to page 12 at the very back, showing what we have here is we're showing the $6.95 on page 12. And then on the bottom one, we're also showing $6.95 on page 12. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frolick. Mr. Reimer, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Just a couple, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Frolick, on page 6, the evaluation is, again, these parameters are model-driven parameters.
That's correct. We're not using the actuals.
And then on page 12, which is the last page, so you mentioned, I believe, that there was a renewal in 2020, and if we look at the, and I apologize, my eyes in this light, if I've got the date wrong, please let me know. I believe the lease runs to March 14th of 2022.
2021.
Actually, I'm going to refer you up at the top of that page, Mr. Frolick.
I'm looking at page 12 here.
Yeah, page 12 at the very top.
Yep.
If you look at the lease 2 column, I think it might be 2022. Can you confirm that?
It says lease 2, yeah, because what happens is because then on the next page here, lease, okay, but see, this is what's interesting here, Carrie, and I'm not trying to mislead the public here or the panel members, because I'm showing on the 2021 mailer, showing that the lease came into place January 1st, 2021, ending January 14th, 2022. So my guess is that that was a step-up lease from 2020 for year 1, and then 2021 to 2022. So it was $695 for year 1, and for year 2, it's at $720.
Yeah, so and that's precisely my point, Mr. Frolick, is we can agree based on what's submitted. Because the information you've got on page 12 is consistent with my understanding. It was a very, very short term. It was a 2-year lease renewal, correct?
Yeah, moving from the original lease in 2008, yes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Ron, any questions of the assessor?
Yes, Mr. Frolick, you had talked about this building being substantially renovated, perhaps?
I didn't mention that, no, but there was renovations that took place when the property from previous appeals. This is the first time I've taken this property in, Mr. Merritt, on a hearing.
Was there any permits taken out, do you know?
Let me take a look here.
Because you've changed the effective age, okay, from...
Yeah, exactly. So that's why we did, Mr. Merritt, is because there were significant improvements, because one of the improvements that took place is when shortly after it was purchased was that new HVAC was created or put into the system to temperature control. So the last permit that we have on file here is in October of 2012, and those permits are 42,000. So just go say 475. Yeah, like the permit values that we have here in place that have been reported since 2012 are only $500,000.
All right. And is the tenant that's in there is still Boeing?
That is correct.
And do you know anything about the lease at all?
Well, my guess is because it was a long-term lease as originally signed in 2008. You know, so there was the initial lease that I'm assuming it expired in 2020, and they've signed on for a couple more years. I don't know anything else beyond that.
Okay. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Cynthia, any questions of the assessor?
No, no questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frolick. Following up on Mr. Ron's question. So the effective year built is 1990 on this building?
That's correct.
And the pictures on page 2 and 3, I guess. Yeah. 2 and 3.
Okay.
When would they have been taken?
Oh, these pictures that are on my brief?
Yeah.
You know what? I just got these off of Google Maps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because originally I went to Andrew Minarski School for shops. It was at Sisler, and before it used to be a brick facade.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's why we've changed the effective age. So even though it's not shown in the permits, it was a red brick facade because prior to Boeing being in there, it was a GM. It was for GM.
Oh, right.
So I remember that. Well, imagine going to Andrew Minarski's adding value to my life as a professional. I can also talk about the Lincoln Hotel, but that's for another day.
So it appears it's been extensively renovated on the exterior, right?
Yeah, which is why it's changed the effective age.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's all my questions. So that concludes Mr. Frolick's presentation. Mr. Reimer, please bear with me 1 second while we find your brief. Okay, when you're ready, Mr. Reimer, 1345 Redwood Avenue.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Can I ask pardon me. Could I ask the board members and Mr. Frolick to turn to page 16, please, for the sake of brevity? In this particular case, we're actually applying the same net market rent that Mr. Frolick has presented this afternoon. The rent is actually, certainly we have some rent comparables on page 14 for larger industrial space that are significantly lower than this. But fundamentally, Mr. Chairman, this comes down to a question not so much of rent, but of risk. So the net market rent of $6.12 a square foot is absolutely admittedly lower than the net rent being achieved. But recall my question, Mr. Chairman, it was on a very, very short-term 2-year renewal. So notwithstanding the very, very short-term higher rent that's being achieved, if I'm an investor and I've got a building of well over 100,000 square feet that has had significant renovations done to it specific to that tenant, would be Boeing, and the Boeing is only renewing in a very, very short-term basis after the expiration of the initial long term, I see this as potentially very, very problematic for the long-term security of the income stream. The $6.95 a square foot certainly is all well and good in years 1 and 2, but again, with the improvements and the renovations that were done peculiar to this tenant, there's virtually no chance that another tenant moving into it would have the same needs and having significant money put into it for the new tenant. Further, you've got a very, very limited market for tenants in this city that require 100,000 square feet of space. So at the end of the day, the market rent, certainly we believe is well within the parameters of the market indicators. And in the case of what we presented, it's higher than those indicators, but certainly well within the indicators of both parties. But it's the income risk in this case that we're suggesting has to be considered. And for the reasons that I just talked about, given the very, very questionable covenant with the short-term lease renewal, we're suggesting the 6.75% cap is shown on page 16, along with the 5% non-recoverable. And that then comes in at a suggested value of $8,837,000. And that's our request this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Frolick, any questions of the applicant?
Just one question, because Mr. Reimer has addressed the question with regards to why he's not using actuals this time as opposed to model driven. So my question is, in previous years, Mr. Reimer, would you have used the market cap rate, or would you use a lower cap rate for a site-specific evaluation for this property? Because, you know, if the lease was like 12 years, that represents a lot of stability. So would you use a lower cap rate in, like, you know, 5 years into the lease as opposed to market cap rates to be reflective of a site-specific evaluation?
Absolutely, Mr. Frolick. A fundamental component of cap rate is risk to the income stream. So certainly if you had a long-term covenant, and it was a very, very solid covenant. That's going to be something that an investor is going to look at when they are placing, when they're placing the risk to the income stream. So your question's a fair one, and I'd suggest that if it was a 20-year term and it all seemed consistent with market and it was a very solid covenant, that is going to indicate a lower risk than when you've got a short-term 2-year renewal on a building that's basically been renovated to suit for this particular tenant. So your question's a good one.
No other questions. Mr. Reimer and I are both motivated to get done. And I appreciate that, Mr. Reimer.
Thank you. Cynthia, any questions of the applicant?
My question was pretty much the same as Mr. Froelic's, and Mr. Reimer has answered that, so I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Ron, any questions of the applicant?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Reimer, your square footage is a little higher than the city, so who's correct? It's minor, but you know.
No, I'm going to stick with my square footage, Mr. Chairman, on page 24 of our brief. That's where the area of 112,340 is set out. So I'm going to stick with my 112,340.
Thank you. You know what? And in fairness, thank you, Mr. Merritt, for pointing that out. So for the next appeal, I will change it to 112,340 because I was looking at the lease from 2014, and it was the 112,340 as well. So that's a mistake on the assessments department. So actually, we should apply for an increase. I'm just teasing. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I have no questions of Mr. Reimer. Any requirement for summary on either party?
No, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. That concludes 1345 Redwood Avenue. Is everybody okay, or does anybody need a quick break?
I'm okay.
I'm fine.
I'm fine.
Okay, and I'm good too. Thank you. Next property in the docket is item number 7. File number 22-3202. Address is 1330 Inkster Boulevard. And we are dealing with a 2023 realty assessment appeal and no preliminary issues, I believe, by either party. So Mr. Froelich, bear with me 1 second. We'll pull up your brief here. Mr. Froelich, when you're ready, please. 1330 Inkster Boulevard.
Roll number is 14-0637-05100. Value is $3,847,000. The actual years built are between 65 and 2020. The wall heights are between 18 and 23. The land area is 265,661, and the leasable area is 56,681. The reason why for the new addition is they changed the facade or the building of the front part, which is why part of it's 2020, and that area in question is they demolished 5,529 square feet, and the actual size after the adjustments went, because the initial size of the building was 58,383, and now it's gone down to 52,854. And well, there's a bit of a conflict here. Oh, that's part of me. I'm looking at the 2019 stuff. I'm sorry. You know what? I'm sticking with the 56,681. I've gotten ahead of myself here, and so I apologize. We're asking that the assessed value be confirmed. And there was a sale on this property on April 27th, 2011 of $2.8 million. And as you could probably see on the bottom of page 2, where it had changed in terms of the presentation or the curb appeal of the building. So page 2 shows the new areas that were being built. The top of page 3 shows the other extension facing Inkster. And then if you see on the bottom of page 3, what it used to look like. So that the ceiling, it seems to me that the ceiling height has been increased just by eyeballing it compared to what it used to be. On page 4, what we're showing here is we're showing the permit that had taken place on August 22nd, 2019, with regards to constructing a 1-story office showroom to the existing warehouse, and that's of 3,857 square feet. Page 5 shows some additional pictures. So we have the 56,681 on page 6 for the leasable area. We're using a rental of $5.34. 4% vacancy, 3% expenses, 385 for shortfall to come up with a net operating income of 273,124, utilizing a cap rate of 7.1%. We have a value of 3,847,000. I have some rents on page 7 supporting the rental rate that we are using, showing rental rates from $550 to $857, all similar areas in terms of being between very close to the subject property. Our range is actually quite tight here, between 47,000 and 61,000 square feet. And none of our leases are really old for any of these properties. And that concludes my final presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frolick. Mr. Reimer, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Just one. So Mr. Frolick, on page 6, then again to confirm, these are model-driven parameters right through potential rent through the cap rate, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's my question.
Thank you. Ron, any questions of the assessor?
I have one, and I'm not sure. I made some notes here. I think, Mr. Frolick, you're on your front page, I think. It's either yours or Mr. Reimer's. The leasable area, there's a typo. It's 58,000 square feet. It should be 56.
Yeah, I have 56,681.
Okay, Mr. Reimer, it's on yours then.
It is indeed.
Okay. Other than that, I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ron. Cynthia, any questions of the assessor?
Oh, just Mr. Frolick, this is owner occupied as far as you know?
Well, see, this is the challenge that we have here, right? Because you know what? There is a lease in place in here that we're showing. We're showing a lease in place here. So it's not owner occupied.
Okay, and do you have the amount of that lease?
Well, the thing is, what's interesting about this here is that the lease that we have here was in 2020. Oh yeah, because this is one of my questions that I was going to have here. So I do believe, let me just double check here, because I did the math. I think the current lease here is at 454, which is below market conditions. Let me just get my glasses here to make sure that I get the math absolutely correct here. So we've got 23,320 times 12 is 279 divided by the 56,515. That works out to 495.
Okay, and that's just one tenant.
One tenant, yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Thanks, Cynthia. And I have no questions of the.
Mr. Chairman, can I redirect?
Of course.
I have one more question. There was supposedly a permit taken out for $1 million.
Yep.
Correct?
That's correct.
And the effective age changed from 1965 to 2020, correct?
Yeah, that's for to be reflective of the new building frontage area in the showroom that was built. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. And I have no questions of the assessor. Mr. Reimer, bear with us 1 second, please. We'll get to your brief for 1330 Inkster Boulevard. Mr. Reimer, when you're ready, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This case distills to two issues. The potential market net rent to be applied, and the non-recoverable expense allowance. If I could ask the board, Mr. Philip, to turn to page 13 initially, please. At the top of page 13, we've got some lease comparable information. It ranges from a low of 437 a foot up to a high of 675 a foot. And based upon the that information and that range, then turning to page 15, suggesting, pardon me, a net market rent of $5 a square foot. I did not, the question had arisen before with respect to the contract rent in place. I did not reference that. I defaulted to market. And based on the $5 rent, and then with the inclusion of the 5% non-recoverable and a 7% cap, just a tick lower than what the department supplied, then I come in at a suggested value of $3,489,000. As far as the clarification and to Mr. Merritt's question, I don't believe Mr. Froelich suggesting that the variant age for the entire property is 2020. Rather, there's two components to the building. The main component being 52,850 square feet. That's the original 1965 building. And then there's a 2020 addition of 3,827 square feet. So it's those two. Obviously, there's a new addition of 3,800 feet. But Mr. Froelich, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe you're suggesting that the overall effective age for the property should be 2020 based on that small building.
Oh, it's much lower than that, Mr. Reimer, and you are correct. And I thank you very much for clarifying that. And if you just bear with me here for 1 sec here, I will actually get you, like, when you're looking at this property, and a great indication of why our effective age is not 2020 is because we got a cap rate of 7.1%. Mm-hmm. So if our cap rate was in 2020, it would be under 6, right? Especially on our close to 6 with regards to that size here. And if you just bear with me here for 1 second, I appreciate your patience with this. Yeah, see, overall, we have an effective age of 1969 for this building.
Thank you, Mr. Froelich. And so, Mr. Chairman, my request is $3,490,000 in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Froelich, any questions of the applicant's evidence?
No, just to confirm, Mr. Reimer, your cap rate's a bit lower than the cap rate that we've used for this property?
Yes.
Okay. No other questions. Mr. Reimer had discussions about this property. We couldn't come to agreement, and I don't know if I even should say that, but it's just, anyways, okay. I apologize. Okay, thank you. No questions.
Thank you. Cynthia, any questions of the applicant?
Well, just about the market rent that you've put here. So I'm looking on your page 13, and you're showing an average of $573 and a median of $588, and then you've put the $5 a square foot on it. So
comparables number 1 and 2 were significantly smaller. So we considered them certainly, but we thought that the comparables for the larger spaces, being indices 3 through 6, were more representative as far as size and also in terms of the age and the wall heights. Comparable number 4 and 6 at 26 foot and 22 feet respectively, we believe were the best sort of indicators, and therefore it's not necessarily a simple average, but between the 437 and the 575, and we selected $5 in this case.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron, any questions?
No, thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. 526. Sorry, just writing here for a second. And I don't believe I have any questions either. No, I'm good. Either party have requirement for summary?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes 1330 Inkster Boulevard. And the last item on our docket is number 8, and we are looking at the file number 22-3209. Address is 1280 Inkster Boulevard. And we're dealing with a 2023 Realty Assessment Appeal. And I believe there's no preliminary issues. Is that correct from both parties?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Frolick, bear with me a second, please. Okay, 1280 Inkster Boulevard. When you are ready, please.
Roll number is 140636, 300 30 100. Assessed value is $2,145,000. We have the original property built in 1960 with effective age of 1973, wall height of 19 feet. Land area is 90,272, and a leasable area is 24,939. I have not inspected this building. Property owner has been compliant with regards to filling out income and expense mailer information. And I got some pictures of an area location of this property on pages 2 and 3. All these properties are in the same area. What we have for this property is that we have a leasable area of 24,939, a rental of $6.03 with a GPI of 150,382, using 4% vacancy, 3% expenses, 385 for shortfall. We come up with a net operating income of 136,195, utilizing a 6.35% cap rate. We come up with $2,145,000. For comparable properties, what we have here is we got a list of properties here that are all in Inkster Industrial Park, all close to the subject property in terms of space. The leases are from 15,000 square feet to 25,393. The wall heights are between 14 and 20 feet. Subject property is 9 feet. And the rents that we're using is between $6 and $7.67. Our model's at 603, so we seem to be within a proper range there. Property owner has been compliant with regards to filling out income and expense mailers. And I need to double check one thing here. Yeah. And the lease that's listed here is at $5.25. So it's significantly lower than what we have in the system. But I want to be true to the process here and be front and honest. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Frolick. Mr. Reimer, any questions of the assessor's evidence presented?
Mr. Frolick, again, these are model-driven parameters, correct?
That's correct.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. That's my question.
Thank you. Ron, any questions of the assessor?
No, thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Cynthia?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions either. Mr. Reimer, bear with us 1 second, please. Mr. Reimer, when you're ready, please. 1280 Inkster Boulevard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could ask the board members and Mr. Frolick to turn to page 13, please, of our evidence in chief. And on page 13, we've got a list of the lease indicators that we believe are comparable. Recall that this is an older industrial building, I believe built in 1960. Yeah, built in 1960s, had a bit of work done over the years, but still the effective age is 1973, with a 19-foot wall height, which by today's industrial standards is far from ideal. So what we've got on page 13 are rent comparables ranging from a low of $290, which we're obviously not using, up to a high of $6.25. What we're suggesting in this case is a net market rent of $5.25 a square foot for a total potential net market rent of $139.24. The market rent, by the way, sorry, not the market rent. The contract rent in place, pardon me, Mr. Chairman, we made no reference to that contract rent. It is, again, a situation where it's more of a book rent. So that is not something that we put weight on. We went to the market to look at the indicators for comparable space. Then turning to page 15. In this case, we've applied the market rent of $5.25 a foot with the vacancy allowance of 4%, again, non-recoverables at 5%, and a cap rate in this case of 7%, that being based on the older age of the improvements and the 19-foot wall height, which by most current industrial standards would be considered obsolete. So this would definitely be a building that's closer to the non-investment grade, but we have, for the purposes of this submission, still applied a cap rate of 7%, and that comes in at a requested value of $1,615,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Frolick, any questions of the applicant?
So you're saying that this building's obsolete then?
The 19-foot wall height is not entirely obsolete, Mr. Frolick, but it's getting there fast, yeah.
Okay, so, but wouldn't a higher wall height generate a much higher rent?
The higher wall height, like if you had a 23 or 24 foot wall height on a newer building that's more efficient, that's going to generate a higher rent, yes.
Okay, and so why is it that you're using 525 where your medium's 567? Because wouldn't you exclude the outlier of $2.90? Because that's not really indicative of market rents for this type of property.
Yeah, but Mr. Frolick, if you look at indices 1 and 2, A, they're a lot smaller. B, they've got wall heights that are superior. And in the case of Salto, it's a newer building. So certainly, you can debate where it falls within this, but looking at all of these comparables, and again, I'm not using the 290, Mr. Frolick, but I'd certainly suggest. Oh, are we still there?
I hear you.
Oh,
something happened there, but I don't know what
happened. Are we still all here? Why are we screaming? If we're all here and can hear me, I'll keep talking.
Actually, I'm mine and picture is gone.
And Ron's still there, so we're looking good there.
Yep. Stream off very quickly. We'll fix this.
There we go. Okay. I am back. Thank you.
Two, one, we are live again.
Okay, we are back again. Live. What was happening there? Sorry, I
Barry
lost.
was answering my question with regards to the church property.
Yeah. In answer to Mr. Frolick's question, the 5.25 was a judgment call. Certainly, I thought based on the comps provided Mr. Frolick that the 5.25 falls well within the range and is consistent with this vintage and with this ceiling. But that's my opinion.
Just a follow-up question. So if we were looking through the Inkster Industrial Park, would there be a lot of rents at $2.90, or would most of them be closer to $5 or north of $5?
I'm not going to comment on what else there might be out there, Mr. Frolick, but as I said, the 290s at the low end, I'm not keen on it. I'm using 5.25.
But wouldn't that affect your average and your medium?
Well, sure.
Okay. No other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frolick. Cynthia, any questions of the applicant?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Ron, any questions of the applicant?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
And I believe I do not either. I am good. So any requirement for summary by either party?
Yeah, I do have a summary. I wish all hearings that I had that were for 6 properties take 2 hours or less. That would be my New Year's resolution. If I could have a New Year's resolution, if there's going to be 6 properties heard, that they're done in 2 hours. So that is my request, and I want to thank Mr. Reimer for his expediency in this process.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Frolick. Mr. Reimer, any comments?
Thank you all for your time.
Okay, thank you. And I believe that concludes item number 8, 1280 Inkster Boulevard. And we have heard all the items scheduled, and this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you to both parties.